conducting my dissertation research, I was interviewing folks who had grown up with 2 moms and 2 dads. And one of the questions I asked them was, when did you first realize that your family was different? And many of them quickly responded, when I started school. Before this, having 2 moms, 2 dads was all they know. But when they got to school, kids started asking questions like, what do you mean you don't have a dad? Or, but where's your mom? They were reading story after story in class where all the families they were seeing were families that had a mom and a dad. And as these experiences compiled, they started to realize that folks didn't consider their families to be normal. Research on LGBTQ plus families really arose from questions in family court and policy spaces around whether LGBTQ plus parents could be good parents. And as psychologists, we knew this was an empirical question. We could design studies, we could analyze data to see if there was any evidence to support these fears that having LGBTQ parents would be harmful for kids. And as we did this, as we conducted study after study comparing those who grew up with LGBTQ plus parents to those who grew up with cisgender heterosexual parents, what we kept finding was that there were no differences in developmental outcomes. But at this point, we took a step back to ask a question that I always encourage my students to ask when we're evaluating research. Does the way we design our study actually allow us to answer the question we're asking? And when we did that, we realized that by designing studies that compare those who grew up with LGBTQ plus parents to those who grew up with cisgender heterosexual parents, this wasn't actually the question we were answering. More specifically, the question our study designs were answering was, can LGBTQ plus parents be like cisgender heterosexual parents? And at that point, we said, what if we set aside this assumption that different means bad? What if instead we look within LGBTQ families to see if these differences could actually be unique strengths? In a recent study that my colleagues and I published, we posed this question right to the folks who had grown up in these families. And what we found was that these youth were seeing that their experiences growing up led them to be more open and accepting. Like in this quote from our participant we called Todd, who said that growing up in an LGBTQ family, his parents really emphasized understanding that all families are different, all people are different, and that you give those folks the respect they deserve. They also talked about how growing up in LGBTQ families led them to have a more expansive idea of what family is. Like Dan, as we talked about, if you love each other a lot, if you take care of each other a lot, that's what's really important. So for these folks, the experiences they had growing up in LGBTQ families weren't just things that made them different from the other kids in class. They were things they could be proud of. So in this study and a growing number of others, what we are finding is that when we move beyond comparing LGBTQ families to other family types, when we stop evaluating diverse families by how closely they resemble a preconceived idea of what a good family is, we do uncover unique strengths. And the insights that we're getting from these studies are exciting because if we can apply the lessons that Todd and Dan learned from their families, then just maybe we can make the world a more affirming place for all families.